So in this video, I'm going to share with you a little bit of my story going from private equity to running a small business and some of the steps I considered when making the leap from one to the other. I'm going to share the 5 top things that I really thought about when starting to set up my small business, even before I'd thought about making any transition or anything like that. These are things that I could sit down, think about, really make sure I had a full understanding of whether or not this business was a venture that was going to be successful or had any merit at all.
Being an entrepreneur can be a roller coaster ride at times. You will have great days, you will have not so great days. You may even from time to time have an awful day. You've got to stay focused and stay level-headed and keep your feet on the ground.
So let's jump straight into it. My first tip is to be really clear on what you're selling. Now this may seem really obvious, but for a lot of people, they fail to plan. And as we know, failing to plan is planning to fail.
Companies that do well at some level, even though it may not be written down on a piece of paper, need to have kind of a clear strategy of why they're different, why they're adding value, why they're producing something special that customers need and that they're not getting now. So I think if there's a clear sense of strategy and you can get all the people aligned around that, then you get a lot more power than if you're just scrambling and working harder and harder and without that clear direction. So that's my one piece of advice.
Now, if you're watching this, you probably already have an idea of a product or service that you're thinking of selling. So for example, you might work in a large company and identify a gap in the market for a particular software or some other tool that you could leave your current job and go and develop and then perhaps even sell back to your current employer. Maybe you're a consultant and you think you can do a better job going out on your own and picking up freelance work, or maybe you're really handy at making goods and you can produce organic soaps that you'd like to sell online. Whatever the idea is, I think it's really important to actually give it some thought to what it is you're selling and how you're going to do it. Now, depending on how creative you want to get, there's a number of ways you can do that. I used about 6 different techniques when I was putting together my plan for what it is I'm going to sell. First of all, you can create buyer personas. So you can think about who it is that your target market is. What does that person look like? What do they do? So for example, if you're selling organic soap, you might think about who your target market looks like, how much disposable income they have, where they live, what they like to do, where they like to shop. After that, you can spend some time actually researching your competition. Now for organic soap, there's plenty of people in that business. So you want to really identify what price they're selling at. If you can get information on the volumes they're doing, sometimes you can find this stuff out on places like Etsy that'll tell you the number of sales. But if you're looking at starting a freelance consulting business, it's going to be more difficult to understand who your competitors are. Are you competing with one of the big consulting firms, or are you competing with just other small freelance consulting people? Next, I did a bit of keyword research. So I started Googling kind of trends associated with the business I wanted to launch. This was to identify whether or not people were searching for this item, whether or not there was any interest kind of organically around, or whether this is something that you're going to really need to invest a lot into advertising and building a new market. After that, it's quite easy to sit down and write just a simple mission statement. What is it that you're setting out to do, and what is it that defines success for this business?
My best advice is to really work hard to clarify what your purpose is and be able to articulate that, be able to communicate it in a simple sentence. And the reason that's important is as you bring people into your company, I think the most important question you ask them is, why are you here? Why do you want to join this company? And if you hear that purpose back, if you hear that passion around that purpose, it makes everything a whole lot easier. Any skill can be learned and taught, but passion cannot.
Before actually going out and making a big decision like quitting your job or anything like that, it's always good to get feedback from people around you. If you have a mentor, you can bounce the idea off them. I have a mentor who I bounced many ideas off and got some quite critical feedback before I decided to take any sort of risk or gamble. You can talk to friends, family, or just anyone that you have a connection with that you might be able to bounce this idea off. For example, a small business networking group in your local community. So by this stage, you are reaching point 2 in the process, which is gathering what you need to launch. By now, you've got a fairly good idea of what it is you're selling, who the target market is, and whether or not people think this has any merit at all. So this is where it gets down to the nuts and bolts of starting a business. Things like choosing a business name, deciding on your business structure. You see there's many different types of structures that exist depending on where you're located around the world. There can be things like limited companies or public companies, private companies, partnerships, trusts, and all sorts of different ways to actually structure this enterprise to begin with that all need to be considered and all the different options weighed up. And there's plenty of people offering professional advice when you get to that kind of decision-making process. Part of that process is going to be things like scoping out a domain and whether or not you can even find something on social media handles that represent your brand accurately. If you want a full video on branding, you can check out my other video. I'll drop a link in the description below. You're also going to need to make a logo and things like that. Now, there are heaps of online free tools that can help with this process. I use Canva. I find it really simple to use. This is not sponsored in any way. I just really like it. It's a great product, and I think it makes it really easy to quickly build brands and launch businesses. For me personally, I opened a business bank account so I could keep my personal finances separate from the business finances. And along with that, you also need some sort of software or way to track all your expenses and income so that you can complete record keeping for tax and things like that appropriately. It's something that can be overlooked, but believe me, from a private equity perspective, when you come into a company looking to acquire it, the ability for the company to keep good records and have good financial systems makes it infinitely easier for people to do due diligence, perhaps if you're looking to exit the business longer term. Now, depending on what sort of business you're planning to start, there are also a whole bunch of other startup costs and considerations that you could perhaps think about. So, for example, equipment and supplies. If you need to buy things to manufacture soap, that's going to cost money and be an overhead for the business. Other things you might consider are packaging and inventory, as well as rent, certification or training, insurance, business cards, websites, online tools, as well as perhaps even travel if you're in consulting and looking to build relationships with clients that you actually need to physically attend meetings. Now, a good way to keep track of all this stuff is using a startup spreadsheet. There are actually some really great tools that are free on Excel, or if you just Google some options for how to create a startup, how to budget for a startup, there's heaps of ideas, and you can kind of roughly fill in what this is all going to cost and come to a kind of an amount that you are happy with. Now, at this point, you might feel overwhelmed at the cost of starting a business, and that is actually one of the realities of this. It's a big financial gamble for some people, and it's definitely not the right option for everyone. A lot of people launch side hustles, which can require a lot less capital to get started, and you can still maintain your employment while you get it established and off the ground, which has less downside risk if it did fail in the future. Now, in business, there are a lot of principles about starting up. The idea that you start lean with a minimum viable product and kind of grow organically, right through to raising huge amounts of capital and going for a massive growth play, which is slightly more difficult and will also depend on your own experience and the ability of a venture capital firm to back you into a deal like that. Another major consideration is pricing, and probably the thing that I gave the most thought to when thinking about starting a small business. You can do pricing a whole bunch of ways. You can think about what it costs you to manufacture the good and then add a margin, or what it costs you per hour of labor spent. The three things that I considered were, what are my competitors doing? What's my time worth? And how can I show value?
Of course, you have to be close to your products, close to your customers, and think about them. That's the most important, but don't forget to think about your business, what your plans are, what you want to do next, how to take your business to the next level. Again, think about being in your business, but think about your business as well.
When considering my competitors, I thought about, am I offering a product that's at a premium to them or at a more kind of commodity level value? What is my time worth? Now, this is a big one that I think a lot of small business owners forget to account for, and that's simply because they work extremely long hours. And if they put their hourly wage on a spreadsheet with how much they make in the business, it probably is below the minimum wage for a lot of them. Finally, demonstrating value was probably the biggest consideration I had when thinking about pricing. I wanted to ensure that I was able to deliver value for my customers. Now, whether that's a superior product at a competitive price, or whether it's delivering a project on time and within budget, ensuring that I deliver value on each one of my products or client requests is really critical, I think, for the success of any small business, because it's going to build relationships, and relationships are going to drive more value in the future.
The best advice to a small business owner, or for that matter, to a large business owner, is never stop thinking about how to delight your customer. Not to satisfy your customer, but to delight your customer. And When you wake up in the morning, start thinking about it. During the day, think about it. At night, think about it, and then dream about it. And no company's ever failed that had millions of delighted customers, and you start with them and you get them one at a time.
So for service-based businesses, you can do per hour or a package fee. So for example, if you were a web designer, you could say a basic website for X amount of money, or you could say, I can build a website. It'll take me roughly 100 hours and my hourly rate is X. For e-commerce, as I said, you normally account for all your costs to manufacture the product and then add some kind of margin that you're happy with that will cover all the things like shipping, as well as accounting for things like returns, or in the case that you get some damaged merchandise from the supplier and accidentally send that out, you'll have to refund that customer to maintain the goodwill and stuff like that. So you kind of need to build all of that into your pricing structure. So depending on what kind of business you run, it's important to kind of have an idea of what your break-even point is. So for a certain manufactured item, you'd want to be able to look at it and say, I need to sell this for X dollars in order to recoup all my overheads, including rent, electricity, insurance, web hosting, and the like. How many units you're going to need to sell per month in order to achieve that break-even point. Next up is building a brand and an online presence. So much of what we do these days is built around social media or just generally being online and being able to be found. So again, you can do a whole bunch of stuff here, and it's really limitless at this point into how you actually market and brand yourself. So you might have a logo by now, you might have business cards, and you might even be dabbling around on social media with a few ads and things like that. And at this point, you can really go as in-depth as you want. You could build your own color scheme and really market your material with a certain kind of design profile or a certain kind of aesthetic that you want to achieve on, say, an Instagram page, right through to simply just having a holding website that just has a mobile number for people to call you from. You can also use other tools to get found, such as freelance platforms that can help at least establish you in the early days. And this brings me to the next stage, which is actually finding your first customers.
My advice to a small business owner or any entrepreneur would be not to be discouraged if the business you end up with is not the one you started out to pursue, because so often you encounter difficulties, you encounter failures, and the important piece is to learn from each of those very quickly and to pivot and to move on to the idea that works.
And again, there are unlimited ways to do this. You can simply use word of mouth. You could drop flyers in letterboxes if it's allowed in your area, I guess. You can put ads in the local newspaper. You can get listed in local directories. You can use social media, and you could even start a blog, which goes into the whole process of search engine optimization. Now, of course, this is all going to boil down to how you're running your business. If you're bootstrapping and running a lean startup, then you might not have that much money to advertise in the beginning. But if you're going for growth on day one, you might have a very substantial advertising budget and you know what your execution strategy looks like. So there you have the process of thinking I went through when thinking about starting my own small business. Now there's quite a lot to this and it can seem very overwhelming and daunting, but I think planning for some of these things is vitally important. In the world of hustle culture, too many people dive into starting a small business or side hustle without actually thinking about what it is they're doing and what they are trying to achieve, and also what are their exit opportunities. I think it's really important to research, plan, and identify what it is that you're trying to achieve from each small business that you're trying to start, and not getting ahead of yourself or getting bogged down in the hustle culture mentality. The practical realities are that a lot of small businesses fail very quickly after starting, and that's probably because a lot of people go in with a mindset that don't worry about it, it'll look after itself, when a little bit of planning at the get-go can really help you in the long run with identifying who your customers are, how you're going to market, and how much it's all going to cost you in the end. That way you can have a bit more of a reality check and go in with your eyes wide open. Anyway, I hope that story's been helpful for you. If you liked this content, please hit the like button or drop a comment below. And if you want to as well, please subscribe to the channel. It'll help me identify what kind of videos people enjoy, whether it's things like this about the small business journey or more on the private equity side or whatever else of interest that I can share with you. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.
There's no substitute for hard work. The best time you're ever going to have is when it starts out just you, and it'd be great if it grows into a wonderful, big, profitable company. But you're never going to be happier and more satisfied than you are in the first year or so of getting your business going, because you do every single thing. You sweep up when everybody goes home, you're the first one in, you plug in the coffee pot so when your people come in, they have hot coffee and can get straight to work. Work through lunch, set an example for them, but there's no substitute for hard work. People say luck, yes, but the harder you work, the luckier you get.